The healthy Saturn in our consciousness is going to exhibit the characteristics of Saturn in Libra, where Saturn is exalted. So that's the best zodiac sign or the best energetic environment for Saturn to express its qualities in the healthiest way. So it's really important to understand that your Saturn doesn't need to be in Libra to have a healthy Saturn. But the characteristics of a healthy Saturn, we can identify them by noticing how Saturn performs when it's in Libra. And so a great way to think about why Saturn's best position is in Libra is to think about what region of the body that Libra rules over, and that is the pelvic region. And that region, part of that region holds the bladder and the rectum, which is what holds the waste in our body that is ready to be expelled. So we learned that Saturn is everything that we're not, which includes our weaknesses and the consciousness that we're lacking in something, in some kind of experience or some kind of characteristic, that we need to learn how to deal with that. So one of the healthiest ways to deal with that sense of lack is to simply avoid the things that we're not good at and to move on. So a healthy Saturn is able to see insecurities or doubts or our inherent weaknesses and expel them from our consciousness in the same way that we're expelling waste from our bodies. So we've extracted all of the nutrients from the food, or we've extracted everything that we can get out of a certain experience, and when it's no longer useful to us, we just get rid of it. It obviously doesn't feel good to be constipated or to be holding in urine, and likewise it doesn't feel good to be holding on to wasteful thoughts, wasteful emotions, and the psychological complexes that are holding us back and end up congregating in our body and toxifying our body little by little. So on this very basic level, a healthy Saturn is able to detach oneself from what is no longer useful, and that could be a relationship, it could be any kind of bad habit, toxic thinking habits, anything that's adding psychological weight to us, that's increasing the sense that we're carrying another burden, anything that's becoming more of a burden rather than a benefit. And as we're going through life and we're building this psychological strength and this armor to protect ourselves against the inevitable setbacks and the winds of difficult change in life, a person with a healthy Saturn isn't going to be very affected by bad news. They are allowing the water to roll off their back, like how a duck lets water roll off their back, and they keep the course. And each planet matures at a certain age, and Saturn's maturing when the Saturn that we have comes to its fruition, and that age is at our 36th year. So between when you are 35 and 36 years old, between that time is when Saturn is maturing, when the full ramifications of how we use Saturn comes to the fore. We can use our Saturn completely at that age. So think about that. It takes half of our life to build up this armor and resilience. If people live to 70, that would be half their life and beyond. But think it takes all that time to grow in that kind of psychological and mental strength. And by that time, a person with a healthy Saturn has learned how to bend but not break, and to be able to handle difficulties and setbacks in life with the kind of sense of repose. And it's really easy to kind of think it's just not a big deal, some things. Some things are a big deal, but when a good Saturn is able to identify, you know what, whatever, and kind of just keep moving on and not to get really wound up and stressed out about hard things that happen that are just going to be inevitable. And this kind of person, instead of allowing small things to become a big deal, what they also do really well is they're able to measure their overall success and to see the temporary victories or the temporary setbacks as just a small part in the bigger game. That there's a much larger goal that they're working towards. So they're not getting hung up in those small victories or setbacks, but instead seeing how close they're getting to a much larger goal that they've been working on. So the sign Libra is the natural 7th sign in the zodiac, and the 7th house cusp is other people, and in particular our partner in life. So Libra is ruled by Venus, the planet of relationships. And Libra, the symbol of Libra are the scales, which is the innate capacity of a person to buy and sell in the marketplace of actual things, but also in the marketplace of ideas. So that ability, the kind of business ability. And what that comes down is what you're doing is you're striking a balance with another person or with another group, but you're working with other people. That's the innate quality. So it's the latent capacity for us to work with other people and how well we do that. And then think about Saturn. Saturn is the loner of the planets. It's the archetype of the hermit or the ascetic who dedicates their life to spiritual growth at the cost of material abundance and living in material destitution. And Saturn is the planet of our basic survival needs, physically and psychologically. And a strong Saturn, what they are doing is that they can get by with less. They can handle physical and psychological difficulties because they don't have this long list of prerequisites to be happy and content with their life. So Saturn is this kind of planet that it has this kind of self-isolation and self-power to it. So why is it doing so? Why would it be the planet that is exalted in the sign of other people, the sign of Libra? Well, it's because a healthy Saturn in general, and especially when exalted in Libra, it understands that other people are a basic component to our life, and other people are the number one resource for us to survive and to help us get through difficulties in life, because Saturn is this consciousness that there are difficulties. Other people are a huge benefit to us when we encounter these situations. So Saturn is all of the burdens that we're carrying, and nothing helps us better to alleviate ourselves of burdens than other people. So we need other people to survive, and we need other people to thrive in life. And just think about, in an extreme example, Saturn is the hermit. So even if you're a hermit living in the mountains by yourself, totally content living in a log cabin alone, you still need to buy pots and pans to cook your food. And is it easier to make a pot or a pan from scratch, from raw materials around your property? Or is it easier to just buy and trade for them from another person? And what about clothes? Are you going to go pick the cotton and make all of the clothes yourself? You could do that. It's very possible. Some people build their homes all by themselves, just them alone in the woods. You can do that. But, of course, say for making pots and pans, for making clothes or building a house, you could do it all yourself, but other people can help you along that. And it takes a lot of time and energy, and increases your workload to an exponential degree if you do all of that yourself. These basic elements of survival. How are you eating? How are you building your shelter? And what clothes are you wearing? So when you incorporate other people into that process, it relieves a person of so many more responsibilities, and it takes weight off your shoulders. As I said, you could do it all yourself, but it's just easier to bring other people into your life to help you live a life that you want, which is total self-isolation. But at times you're still going to need other people. So that's a really extreme example if you're a hermit or if you're alone in the woods. But even then, bringing other people into your life is extremely practical and intelligent to do. And the point is that a healthy Saturn is not afraid to ask other people for help and to rely on other people in a balanced way. So when we have something that another person wants, but we no longer need that thing, or we have a surplus of that thing, and then they have something we want, we just make that simple exchange. So Saturn unburdening ourselves of things we don't need anymore. Say it's an old couch that you want to sell because you have enough money to buy a new couch. Unburden yourself. Don't just throw it onto the street. You could actually, someone might really want that couch, and you could sell it to them. They would like to pay for that old couch. There's all these different ways to do it. So I no longer need this, someone else needs it. I'm unburdening myself of it. This is a highly intelligent way to increase your to get rid of things that are just no longer useful, which are useful to other people. And that's the entire world of Libra. And the ability to find these ways of exchange in any type of way as you can imagine. And Saturn is an air planet, and Libra is an air sign. And air is the element of movement, the movement of energy at the core level, but the movement of ideas, the movement of physical things, and that includes communication. So Saturn is not the planet of being an eloquent communicator, but communication is much more than just speech. And so trade has been one of the most effective modes of communication between human beings for time eternal, because it mutually benefits survival. And that's what Saturn is. It's how are we getting through our basic survival needs? How am I taking care of the essentials in my life, the most fundamentals? And by trading with other people, you're able to handle those tasks. And it's not talking about making expensive purchases and things like that, finding a good deal on that. It's just taking care of the baseline needs and necessities. And just think about the trade routes that people would do when all there were ships, when there were no airplanes. They would spend months on boats taking the products that they've made to go to other countries to sell them and to get the products for that country and bring it back home. So trade is so key for basic human survival. And a healthy Saturn, what they are is that they're very, very resourceful. And being resourceful, what is that doing? It's making your life run smoother and run easier. A healthy Saturn is they're lacking that ability of being resourceful, to find ways that make things run better and to unburden ourselves of troubles and difficulties and struggles. We already have enough of that. We already have a Saturn to nag us about our weaknesses. We already have that kind of weight of human consciousness that we're flawed beings. How do we get through that? A healthy Saturn finds ways to ease that pain or ease the material difficulties that we're going through, to remove as many of the obstacles that we can. And so what that comes down to is that a healthy Saturn isn't afraid of other people becoming an important resource for them to help them get through life. And you see other people, and they see other people as critical resources. And creating long-term relationships is one of the most important ingredients in achieving anything in life, whether that's career success and relationship success, which we'll talk about in a minute. But think about the opposite sign of Aries, which is the sign of going it alone. The unhealthy Saturn has this idea that in order to survive, they're going to have to do everything themselves. And that's the hardest way you could go through life. So life is just so much more difficult with that kind of attitude, that any problems, I have to deal with it. Closing oneself off to other people and not allowing them to help you in any kind of way. So Saturn's lessons, they're hard enough as it is, and we all have this cross to bear in life, and Saturn is that cross. So there's no need to pile on more crosses and more responsibilities when there are other people that are there to help us with it, who can help us with it. So when it comes to significant others, Saturn being exalted in the sign of mutual exchange, of relationships in general, the healthy Saturn, these people are, the healthy Saturn consciousness can find a partner with long-term potential who is going to be dependable and loyal when life gets tough. So when there are difficulties in a marriage, what those trying times do is it works to solidify the bond between the couple when they get through those tough times. And when there is good communication and they're really conscientious about working towards the future and having a long-term commitment despite setbacks and difficulties. That's what makes a relationship more powerful and more beneficial and fulfilling overall, when you look at your partner and say, we got through a lot of tough times together. And I love that person on a much deeper level because, life isn't just this perfect bed of roses, and those tough times inform a person's character, and they build our character in a much more profound way. So when when partnerships fail and when life gets hard for one of the two people, and they give up, that's the sign of a weak Saturn. When, oh, this is just too hard, let's just call it quits. That's the weak Saturn. When you decide to make a commitment, then, oh, I thought it was just going to be easy. Well, no, a healthy Saturn will prioritize choosing a partner that they know that they're going to be able to depend on over that long haul. And most importantly, they themselves are committed and dedicated to the partner long term. They are the partner that is going to be the rock that can weather storms. And they're going to be able to, since they're embodying that, they know that within themselves, and they'll want to find that same quality in a partner that is able to be tough when life gets hard. So when one of the two partners, say they're in a marriage and they become dissatisfied in some kind of way and they decide to end the marriage or end a long-term relationship, and then when a person looks back after a couple years they realize that they made a major mistake, that is the sign of a very bad Saturn. So when men do that, oftentimes it's because they have a wandering eye and they want a younger woman to be with, and they're prioritizing their having a younger, less experienced woman who is normally less mature. And what they realize is that they'll come to realize that a committed wife is much more valuable to have than just some temporary sexual partner. And that leads to they have that sense of regret. When women do it, it's because they say they become quote unquote bored, and they get tired of the mundane aspects of life, and they want to say go out on the weekends, or maybe they feel their emotional needs aren't being met. And in this example, I'm not talking about physically and emotionally abusive relationships. So what happens when either the man or the woman decide to break off the relationship, which is really tragic and predictable? When they break it off and then they start to feel regret, they realize that their current circumstance is a lot harder and a lot more physically and emotionally draining than if they had a dependable partner that they've been working with for over that long period of time, who is helping with bills, who is providing stability and safety. So when it happens with men, they realize that having a wise, mature woman who they shared experiences with and companionship with, that is a much more beneficial thing long term than just a new person that your eyes lit up for. So relationships, they're so multifaceted and they're so nuanced. And there are so many reasons why two people would choose to separate. And so I'm talking about here that when one of the two feels regret after they broke off the relationship, that being a sign of an unhealthy Saturn. And because they're not having a long-term view of what the stability of and the value that a long-term relationship can bring to any person's life. So the healthy Saturn isn't falling into that trap. And that is partly created by modern life providing us with seemingly unlimited choices. And what can happen is that a person, they become a slave to the infinite options, or they see that one thing isn't worth carrying out for a long period of time. And that kind of mindset actually involves several different planets. It can involve Mercury. It involves also the moon wanting the grass to be greener on the other side, that there's always that something that could be better. But when it comes to a healthy Saturn, what they're doing is that they're simplifying their choices. They're not getting lost in the infinity of all of the different possibilities, and they bring it down to a very, very simple level, and they make the choice and they live with that choice, and they'll make the subtle adjustments, and they're able to follow through over a long period of time with what they've chosen to do. They're not getting basically an unhealthy Saturn is very impatient and wants things to change really quickly. But the healthy Saturn is an extremely patient person in general. In any long-term relationship, it's going to require compromise and choosing the right battles. So some couples, they'll agree on everything and they're constantly at one side, and that's a beautiful thing. These people have great marriage karma. But for the majority of relationships, there are times when you realize that there's some incompatibility in some area of the relationship or on some issue. So there's a weak point in the compatibility in some way. The question is how are you going to handle that incompatibility, that weakness, which is the big question of Saturn? What do we do when we understand that there's some kind of flaw within us, or say within the partnership in general? The unhealthy Saturn harkens on that weakness, whether that's in the relationship or on themselves. And they're going to make that weakness bigger than it should be, and often will complain about it incessantly. But the healthy Saturn is able to put that incompatibility aside, able to detach from the minor discrepancies and say opinions about politics or social issues or family relationships. They're able to get through the disagreements, and they're not making it a big deal if it's not a big deal. So they can ask themselves, is this something that I want or something that I need to be focusing on? Will our relationship survive if I put this issue aside? Is it something that can be resolved over time? So most problems in relationships can be resolved over time as the two people are adapting to one another. A lot of problems don't need to be solved that minute. So as I said, the unhealthy Saturn is very impatient, but the healthy Saturn is able to see their way through the problem by taking, again, that long-term approach, and knows when it's just time to step away, to detach from the issue at hand, and to, again, wisely pick the battles, wisely pick the obstacle that should be focused on. Because not everything is worth our time and energy in that way. And very importantly, to know how to compromise when it's necessary, and to strike that balance when it comes to other people. How am I going to build a bridge? How are we going to come to some kind of agreement, even if that agreement is to agree to disagree? That's a lot healthier way to deal with it than to allow that problem to stick with you, stay in your consciousness, stay in your body, and to let it be unresolved. And that when unresolved conflicts are always flowing through your mind, again, that's just creating another burden. Healthy Saturn finds ways to not add extra burdens mentally, psychologically, and when it comes to partnerships, knows when to make those kind of subtle adjustments so that the problems don't grow and become heavier over time. And when it comes to the intelligence of Saturn, which is the intelligence of simplicity, the healthy Saturn knows when it's time to stop and to give something a rest, which is the skill I've been alluding to. So one of the best pieces of advice I've heard about when it comes to using Saturn in an excellent way is that sometimes the best strategy or the best way to deal with a problem, a current problem, is to just simply drop it, go take a nap, wait for the problem to blow over, and then return to it later. And in that process of going and just stopping, going to take a nap, going to just let it fester, let it blow over, the problem will disappear. It's very interesting how life works like that. How if there's some kind of issue at say a concert or something, or at an event in a public space, and say a fight breaks out between people, the best strategy, so there's a problem going on, there's an issue, the best is to go to another part of the grounds, wait for it to blow over, wait for everything to be resolved, and then you can go back to where that problem was, and it's all of a sudden it's gone. So it's just literally detaching yourself from that situation and letting it resolve itself. So it's really the simplest way to deal with the problem, is to just get yourself away from it. Not every problem can be dealt with like that, but a really intelligent Saturn, just let's get away from this. Let's get away from this hostile individual, say on the street, and not engage with it. We're not going to actually fix the situation. It's not our job to. Let's just go away. So a solid Saturn knows when that being a bit lazy and doing little to nothing is actually what the situation might be calling for, just doing nothing about something. It's this intelligence to not keep pushing and to just simply stop. We'll be talking about this more in the upcoming video, the next video of Saturn and Saturn's enemy, the Sun, which is not knowing when to stop. But the bottom line for the healthy Saturn is to develop this consciousness of where and what is the limit. Saturn is, so a good way to think about it, Saturn is the common worker, the day laborers. And what's the great advantage of a day laborer, someone that has an hour time slot that they're working? Well, when it's 5 o'clock, you clock out and you don't have to work for the rest of the day. That's a great advantage. You can just go live your life and do something that you want to do because your work ended. So there's a stopping point. That's what the Saturnian jobs are. And think about, and then what's not a Saturnian job? Well, an entrepreneur, a person who has their own business. They don't have that luxury where they can just, all right, putting it all down. You know, they try to, but a new problem will come up that only they can fix, that has to be fixed really quickly. And you'll see entrepreneurs, they're constantly working all hours, and it can be very, very draining. It's a tough thing to be an entrepreneur. And an example that I've seen firsthand is my aunt. She's run a very successful lobster roll business in Portland, Maine. It's called Bite Into Maine. I was wearing their t-shirt the other day, and her and her husband, my uncle, I worked with them their second year, and it was just us three. And if you actually go to their Instagram page, the very first photo on their Instagram is me working in the food truck. It started off as a food truck, and they differentiated themselves in that market of that very big market of lobster rolls. They have all these different styles of lobster rolls, and they became really, really successful over time. Very successful. Even at that time, there were long lines at the food truck. It became a tourist destination. They've been on the Food Network a couple times. They're in all kinds of magazines. They've won all these awards. So fast forward 10 years, it's not just her, my uncle, and me working, a small family business. Now she's got multiple locations, I think 3, a brick and mortar. She's got the food truck, a bigger expanded one. They have an Airstream where they go to events for weddings, for festivals, and they have all of these assets. And she's got 10, 15 employees. She's got all these other managers. And wow, that's great success. But how is her life now? It's harder because I'm not going to put words in her mouth, but the responsibilities that she has to do as the entrepreneur, as the leader, her and her husband, my uncle, they can never really stop. There's always a fire to put out. There's always something else that they have to do. She's always got to be checking in with her manager. She's checking in the security of the locations. It's become so stressful. Now think about her Saturnian workers, the people with the time slot. They just go in, they do their work, do it as best they can, and then they clock out. They don't ever have to worry about the same things my aunt has to worry about. They go on and live their life. So this is to say that the Saturn in our consciousness is this ability to know when the work is done and to stop, knows when it's time to rest. And so my aunt, she's getting to that point where they're planning on selling the business for a huge gain, for a huge profit, and to enjoy their retirement nest egg. So even though she's an entrepreneur, she is finding the time of the Saturn in her life. When is this time? Okay, we can't keep pursuing this forever. It's draining to us. We're losing energy. Why don't we sell it and enjoy the fruits of what we've built? And that's knowing, okay, it's time to wind something down. It's time to stop. It's time to take a rest. Knowing that point in a person's life is having a healthy Saturn. And we all reach these points when, if we don't stop, we're going to break. Healthy Saturn doesn't get to those points. It knows when to hit the brakes and to allow oneself to recuperate and to, like I said, just be a little lazy sometimes. And so on a psychological level, this amounts to knowing our limitations and, very importantly, how to set healthy boundaries in all areas of our life. So the unhealthy Saturn doesn't know when it's time to say, no, that's not for me, that's not good for my life, and instead they'll set no boundaries, and all of a sudden they find themselves in the situations where they're wasting time and energy. They're adding burdens into their life. If they had set that boundary, they wouldn't have gotten themselves into trouble or found new problems. And the other way is if they have no boundaries, they have too many boundaries. This is unhealthy Saturn, being extremely restrictive and allowing a fear of new things and a fear of opportunities to decrease their potential to grow. So the healthy Saturn knows themselves on a very deep level, and they understand their strengths, and very importantly, they know their weaknesses, and they set up their life with proper boundaries so they don't wind up in really shitty situations that they have to crawl their way out of, or they have to sort out a bunch of issues that they didn't ever want to have to deal with. And because they didn't realize that a boundary, the point of it is to say that not everything is for me. Not everything is meant to be for me. And knowing yourself and knowing what is or isn't for you is going to save you so much time and energy. And Saturn is the planet of conserving energy and saving ourselves from having to deal with troubles and problems that could have easily been avoided if the proper boundaries were put up. And that, which I always talk about, the ultimate boundary, the ultimate limitation is the boundary of death. Our life is limited. So what are we going to do with that limitation? What are we going to do with the time that we have? The healthy Saturn treats life as this marathon and not a sprint. And they're not burning themselves out, involving themselves in things that they shouldn't be involved with. And they build a successful life by conserving energy, not wasting time, and not having the proper boundaries, and knowing what's right for them and knowing what's not right for them. And really highlighting the things that play to our strengths rather than things that are going to be highlighting our weaknesses or exaggerating our weaknesses. And so that point of setting proper boundaries is how Saturn will corral us into a life that works, a life that reduces the amounts of burdens and stresses that we're going to have to be dealing with, because we're always going to be having to deal with stresses. And when we have the proper boundaries, when we set them up for ourselves, we're reducing the likelihood that we're going to be slowly draining ourselves over time. We don't want to be keeping adding crosses onto our shoulders, adding more weight of Saturn. We want to do our best to eliminate and to reduce the wasteful thinking, and as I said in the beginning, to just get rid of things that aren't working, and to do our best to lighten our load, lighten the load. That's what a healthy Saturn is in the habit of doing, finding all of these different ways, and the ways I've been talking about, to reduce the amount of potential problems that we're going to encounter or that we could encounter.